The rain outside Norfolk House is relentless. It is the early hours of June 5th, 1944. Inside the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Forces War Room on St. James's Square in London, the air is thick, cigarette smoke curling under the fluorescent lights, wet wool drying on chair backs, the faint hiss of a field radio in the corner. A half-drunk cup of tea sits cold beside a stack of weather reports. No one has touched it in an hour. General Dwight D. Eisenhower stands at the edge of the map table. He does not speak. His hands rest on the table's edge, fingers pressed flat against the wood, and he stares at the coastline of Normandy, at the beaches designated Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword, as though by looking hard enough he might see through the night, through the channel, through the storm, still churning above the English countryside. Around him, the senior commanders wait: Air Chief Marshal Tedder, General Montgomery, Admiral Ramsey, General Morgan. They have already spoken. The meteorologist, Group Captain Stagg, has already delivered his report. A narrow window, perhaps 36 hours of acceptable conditions, opening on the morning of June 6th, before another low-pressure system closes it shut for weeks. A decision of almost incomprehensible weight hangs in the room. Eisenhower looks up. He does not raise his voice. "Okay, we'll go." No one moves for a moment. Then the room erupts into controlled, purposeful motion, signal officers reaching for telephones, aides gathering documents, the machinery of the largest amphibious operation in the history of warfare, lurching into its final, irreversible motion. But something else is happening in this room that no one fully articulates. Not yet. The map on the table shows 5,000 ships and 160,000 men poised to strike. What it cannot show is what comes after. The chain of consequences that will remake the strategic architecture of the entire war. Eisenhower has not simply issued an order. He has set in motion an event that will, within 72 hours, fundamentally and permanently alter what is possible in Europe. He does not know this yet. No one does. By the spring of 1944, the Allied strategic position in Western Europe is defined above all by patience, and by a plan of almost baroque complexity that has been years in preparation. Operation Overlord, as finely structured, calls for 5 divisions to land simultaneously across a 50-mile front on the Normandy coast, supported by 3 airborne divisions dropped behind the beaches the previous night. The naval component, Operation Neptune, involves 6,939 vessels of all types, the largest armada ever assembled. Air superiority over the landing zones has been painstakingly secured through months of attrition against the Luftwaffe. The transportation plan, championed by the economist Solly Zuckerman and fought over bitterly in Allied councils, has systematically degraded the French rail network, slowing the Wehrmacht's capacity to move reserves. The deception operation, Fortitude, may be the most elaborate strategic deception in military history. Through a combination of false radio traffic, dummy formations, double agents, and the calculated misuse of the German intelligence service's own networks, Allied planners have convinced OKW, the German High Command, that the primary invasion, when it comes, will fall on the Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. The fictional 1st United States Army Group, nominally commanded by General George S. Patton, exists primarily in German intelligence files. Eisenhower's confidence in these final weeks before the landing is not the confidence of a man who believes the operation carries no risk. He is too experienced for that. It is, rather, the confidence of a man who believes that every variable that can be controlled has been controlled, and that the margin built into the plan is sufficient to absorb what cannot. The German defensive position in Normandy is formidable, but it is not, the Allies calculate, insurmountable. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding Army Group B, has spent the winter of 1943 to 44 reinforcing the Atlantic Wall with genuine energy, flooding the coastal lowlands, placing millions of beach obstacles and mines, demanding that the Panzer reserves be moved forward to the beaches. But Rommel's superior, Field Marshal Geert von Rundstedt, disagrees with his deployment philosophy. Von Rundstedt believes the panzers must be held back, used as a strategic reserve to destroy the landing force after it has come ashore and before it is consolidated. The argument between them has reached Hitler's desk and has not been resolved. The Panzer Reserve remains split. Some divisions under Rommel, the critical ones, including the 1st SS Panzer Corps, held under OKW control, unavailable without Hitler's personal release. This command dysfunction is known, at least in general terms, to Allied intelligence. It is factored into the planning. The first days will be costly. But if the beachhead holds, if the logistical build-up proceeds according to schedule, if fortitude continues to suppress the German armoured response, the campaign should proceed to plan. That is the calculation as of the night of June 5th. And being so is. The first reports from Normandy reached London in the grey hours of June 6th. The American airborne drops, 82nd and 101st Divisions, have scattered badly. Strong winds and cloud cover have dispersed the transport formations, dropping paratroopers across an area far wider than intended. Some units have landed miles from their objectives. The 82nd's 507th and 508th Parachute Infantry Regiments are fragmented across the flooded Maderet Valley. Cohesion at the company and battalion level is partial. The plan assumed concentrated forces seizing specific terrain objectives in the dark. What has happened instead is a dispersal that creates chaos. But chaos, it will emerge, that cuts both ways. German commanders on the Cotentin Peninsula cannot determine where the main threat is, because the Americans appear to be everywhere. At Utah Beach, the landings go remarkably well. A navigational error pushes the assault waves a mile south of the planned sector, accidentally placing them on a lightly defended stretch of coastline. Within hours, the 4th Infantry Division is moving inland. At Omaha, the situation is catastrophic. The German 352nd Infantry Division, its presence in the sector, known to some Allied intelligence assessments but not incorporated into planning by the V Corps assault team, is positioned in strength along the bluffs above the beach. The DD tanks of the 741st Tank Battalion, launched too far offshore in rough seas, almost entirely founder and sink. The demolition teams attempting to clear beach obstacles take devastating losses. By mid-morning, elements of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions are pinned at the shingle, advancing by yards and dying by hundreds in the killing grounds below the bluffs. At Schaff, the reports are fragmentary, contradictory and agonizing. The communication links between shore and ship are overwhelmed. Early dispatches suggest the possibility of catastrophic failure on Omaha, that the beach may have to be abandoned, that the entire landing southern flank is in danger. Eisenhower's Chief of Staff, General Walter Bedell Smith, later recalls the tension in the headquarters that morning as unlike anything he experienced in the war. Eisenhower has already written the note, in his own hand, on a small piece of paper folded in his shirt pocket. It is the message he will release to the press if the landings fail. Our landings in the Cherbourg-Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based upon the best information available. The troops, the air and the navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. The note stays in his pocket. The morning continues. By afternoon on June 6th, the situation begins. Not to resolve, but to clarify. Omaha Beach is not lost, it is held. It is held by acts of individual and collective courage that defy operational logic, by naval gunfire from destroyers pressing so close to shore that their keels are nearly touching the sandbars, by platoon leaders and sergeants and privates who begin to move, separately, then in small groups, up the draws and over the bluffs above the beach, prying apart the German defences from the flanks and the rear. By evening, the beachhead at Omaha is shallow, bloodied and costly. But it exists. Across Normandy, the picture emerging by June 7th is one that the German command structure is entirely unprepared to process. The critical OKW Panzer Reserve, the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, the Panzerlehr Division, the 1st SS Panzer Division, cannot be released. Throughout June 6th, as the landings consolidate, Hitler sleeps. His staff refuses to wake him. The standing order is that OKW Panzer reserves require the Führer's personal authorization, and the Führer is not to be disturbed. By the time the order is issued, the Allied air forces are already in operation over the Norman Road network. Movement by day is nearly impossible. The Panzerlehr Division, moving up on June 7th, loses dozens of vehicles to Allied fighter bombers before it reaches the front. Fortitude is still working. OKW continues to believe, will continue to believe, astonishingly, for weeks, that Normandy is a feint, that the real blow is still coming at the Pas de Calais. The 15th Army, positioned to defend that coast, will sit in place for weeks, its 30-odd divisions immobilized by a deception that exists only in radio traffic and the reports of compromised agents. The German response is arriving, but it is arriving late in pieces without coordination against an Allied force that is growing faster than it can be contained. Every day that passes, more ships arrive off the Normandy beaches. More men, more vehicles, more ammunition, more fuel. The artificial mulberry harbours are not yet complete, but the build-up continues. Across open beaches, through landing craft running aground and being pulled off and running aground again. By June 10th, 4 days after the landing, the 5 Allied beachheads have merged into a single, continuous front. The lodgement exists. It is being supplied and reinforced. It cannot easily be destroyed. The campaign's first strategic phase is essentially won. Neither side fully recognizes this yet. Inside OB West, von Rundstedt's headquarters at Saint-Germain-en-Laye, outside Paris, the disagreements that paralyzed German planning before the landing have not resolved. They have intensified. Rommel wants the panzers committed immediately, in mass, before the Allies consolidate. Von Rundstedt agrees in principle, but is fighting Hitler's insistence that no major ground must be ceded, no elastic defence attempted, every inch held. The result is a series of brutal, costly counterattacks against Allied positions that are growing stronger by the hour. Localised tactical efforts that exhaust irreplaceable armoured formation without achieving operational objective. The Hitler-Jugend Division attacks British and Canadian positions south of Caen on June 7th, with genuine ferocity, and is stopped. The 21st Panzer Division, which had the best opportunity to drive to the coast on D-Day itself, and failed to do so decisively, is now locked into defensive fighting around the city. Caen, which Montgomery's original plan envisioned capturing on D-Day, will not fall for 2 months. But the German fixation on Caen and on the British and Canadian sector generally creates a concealed opportunity. The American sector to the west, the bocage country of the Cotentin, the dense hedgerows and sunken lanes that make every field an ambush site, is slow, grinding, costly. But it is moving. The 4th Infantry Division links up with the 101st Airborne on June 8th. By June 18th, the 9th Infantry Division cuts across the base of the Cotentin Peninsula, isolating the port of Cherbourg. The fortress falls on June 26th. For von Rundstedt and his staff, the realization is growing, not acknowledged in any single conference, not stated in any single report, but present, building, in the gap between what the intelligence summaries say and what the frontline reports show. The landing force is not being contained. It is being engaged, held in places, bled in others, but it is not being pushed back. And behind it, the ocean is endlessly, implacably delivering more. On June 17th, Rommel and von Rundstedt travelled to Margival, near Soissons, for a conference with Hitler. The meeting is a study in mutual incomprehension. The field marshals lay out the operational situation with precision. The Allied air power makes daylight movement impossible. The panzer reserves are being bled in local counterattacks. The build-up ratio favours the Allies and will only worsen. A strategic withdrawal to defensible lines is necessary before the American breakout they can both see forming in the West. Hitler speaks of new weapons, of political transformations, of the necessity of holding every position. He does not permit a single significant withdrawal. The conference ends without decision. Von Rundstedt is asked afterward by Keitel what should be done. His answer is recorded. "Make peace, you fools." Within days he is relieved of command. At Scharf the recognition comes differently. Not as a crisis, but as a calculation. Through the month of June and into July, Eisenhower watches the campaign with a mixture of frustration and growing conviction. The progress is slower than planned. The hedgerow country is brutal. Casualty rates in the infantry are alarming. The breakout he needs is not coming. Montgomery's operations around Caen, Epsom in late June, Charnwood in early July, grind into the German defences and achieve limited gains at high cost. American commanders grow impatient. Washington grows impatient. There are quiet, terse conversations about command structure, about tempo, about whether the campaign is being prosecuted with sufficient aggression. But the intelligence picture, assembled daily in the Shaft G 2 section under Brigadier Kenneth Strong, is telling a different story. The German divisions in Normandy are not regenerating, they are depleting. The 12th SS Panzer Hitlerjugend, which began the campaign with 177 tanks, has fewer than 50 operational by mid-July. The Panzerlehr is at approximately 40% strength. The infantry divisions holding the line are being reduced to regimental and battalion groups, patched together from the remnants of formations that no longer exist as coherent units. The replacements arriving cannot match the losses being inflicted. The map at Shah F tells the story in numbers. The Allies have landed over 1 million men by late July. They control a continuous front stretching from the Orne to the base of the Cotentin. Their air forces fly thousands of sorties daily without effective opposition. Their logistics system, improvised and strained, is nonetheless delivering. And on July 25th, the carpet bombing begins at St. Lo. Operation Cobra, General Omar Bradley's breakout plan, sends 2,500 Allied aircraft to drop 4,000 tons of bombs on a narrow corridor of German frontage, held by the remnants of Panzerlehr. The bombing is not precise. American casualties are taken from short drops, including Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in the European theatre. But the German position in the corridor ceases to exist as an organized defense. General Fritz Bayerlein of Panzerlehr later reports that perhaps 70% of his men are dead, stunned, or unable to fight. The road is open. The 1st Infantry Division pushes through. The 2nd Armoured follows. Within 48 hours, the front is not bending. It is dissolving. General George Patton's Third Army is activated on August 1st, pouring through the gap at Avranches. By August 3rd, armoured columns are driving south into Brittany and southwest toward the Loire. The speed of movement is unprecedented in the Western Theatre. Divisions are covering 40 and 50 miles in a day. The German 7th Army's southern flank is hanging in open air, secured by nothing. At OB West, now under Field Marshal Gunther von Kluges, who has replaced von Rundstedt, the implications are being absorbed in real time. Hitler's response is characteristically audacious and catastrophically wrong. On August 7th, he orders an armoured counterattack westward through Mortagne, aimed at cutting Patton's supply line at Avranches and splitting the Allied force. The Mortagne attack employs 4 panzer divisions and achieves initial surprise, but it is conducted in daylight, in clear weather, with Allied air power overhead. The fighter bombers tear the attacking columns apart. The attack stalls within hours, and in stalling, it drives the attacking panzer divisions deeper into a pocket that is closing around them. Eisenhower sees it the moment the maps update. Montgomery sees it. Bradley sees it. The German 7th Army and elements of the 5th Panzer Army, perhaps 100,000 men, and the better part of Germany's remaining armoured strength in France, are being encircled, the Falaise pocket is forming. There is a moment, somewhere in the second week of August 1944, in the Chef War Room, whether at Granville or Portsmouth, or in the map trucks that follow Eisenhower forward, when the Supreme Commander looks at the overlays on the situation map and understands that the campaign's essential question has been answered. The question was never simply whether the landings would succeed. It was whether, once the lodgment was established, the Wehrmacht in France retained the operational capacity to stabilize a defensive line, whether the German army in the West could absorb the Allied build-up, trade space for time, and turn the campaign into the attritional struggle that German strategic doctrine preferred. The map says no. The Falaise pocket is sealed on August 19th. The carnage inside it, vehicles burned bumper to bumper on the roads, artillery pieces abandoned in fields, infantry overrun in orchards and farmyards, represents the practical destruction of the German army in France as a functioning operational force. Estimates of German losses in the pocket range between 40,000 and 50,000 killed or captured, with thousands of vehicles and nearly all heavy equipment lost. Paris is liberated on August 25th. By September 1st, the front is on the Seine, then the Somme, then the Belgian border. The speed of advance is so great that it strains Allied logistics to the breaking point, creating the supply crisis that will define the campaign's next phase. Unwittingly, Eisenhower's formal recognition of what had happened is contained not in any single dramatic statement, but in the accumulating tone of his communication through August. The cables to Marshall growing more assured, the press briefings more deliberate, the internal planning documents beginning to address not whether France would be liberated, but how quickly Germany itself might be reached. The note he had written on June 5th, the one accepting blame for failure, had been crumpled and tucked into a pocket. An aide found it weeks later and preserved it. It stands today as perhaps the most quietly revealing artifact of the campaign, the commander's acknowledgement of what failure might have looked like, kept close as a reminder of what success had cost. What Eisenhower understood in those August weeks, what the maps made undeniable, was that D-Day had not simply opened a second front. It had forced the German military to fight the war. It could not survive. A two-front land war, in which the Wehrmacht was simultaneously bleeding in the east under Soviet pressure and being destroyed in the west by Allied firepower and logistics, was beyond any realistic German capacity to endure. The landing had made that war inevitable. The architects of the Atlantic Wall had spent 4 years fortifying a coastline. They had built concrete and steel, and mined the beaches and trained the tides with iron obstacles. As they had argued about panzers and reserves and the precise location of the blow they expected. What they could not fortify against was the moment the blow landed and held. By the autumn of 1944, Germany was fighting for its borders. The initiative that had carried its armies to the Atlantic, to the Volga, to the gates of Cairo, was gone. The war had not ended. It would continue for 9 more months of terrible cost. But its outcome, the fundamental question of who would determine Europe's future, had been settled on a strip of Norman coastline, in the grey morning of a June day, by men who climbed out of the water and kept moving. The war no longer belonged to its architects. It belonged to the tide.